They said the princess died screaming on the battlefield. So when the palace bells rang for a funeral that had already happened, the alien queen didn't stand from her throne. She rose slowly like a storm remembering its name, because walking through the outer gate was her daughter, alive, armored in enemy steel, and at her side a human. The funeral flames had been bright enough to stain the sky. Queen Valith watched from the highest balcony of House Sorin, her crown heavy with ceremonial grief. Below, the pyre's blue fire licked the night air, releasing columns of scented smoke, cinder, sweet resin, morning incense, the old spices that made the tongue numb and the mind obedient. Her empire demanded rituals the way lungs demanded oxygen. The priest had spoken the name of Princess Seria with practiced reverence. Fallen in battle, body unrecovered, death confirmed by the last signal from her armor, honor intact. Those words mattered to Valith's court. To Valith, they were a knife turned slowly. Seria was not supposed to die. Not after years of forcing Valith's enemies to kneel. Not after surviving assassinations, ambushes, orbital raids, and the poison-cold diplomacy of rival houses. Not after promising as a hatchling to return from every hunt, every war, every impossible mission. Valith did not cry in public. She had not cried at her mate's death or her father's, or at the moment she took the throne and realized the throne took more from her than it gave. But when the pyre reached its peak and the bells began, she felt something in her chest unhook. A quiet emptiness. A void that did not scream, because screaming would imply there was still air inside it. The court dispersed, satisfied by ceremony. Valith remained. Only when the balcony emptied and the night swallowed the last ash did she whisper to no one and everything, "Bring her home." The words were meaningless. The universe did not bargain. Yet the next cycle, the very next dawn, the outer ring sent an alarm that cut through the palace like an electric blade. Not the shriek of invasion, not the whisper of internal treason. A single chime repeated, "Gate arrival, unscheduled, high-security clearance unknown." Valith's advisors flinched. Her generals tightened their grips on ceremonial blades they had never bloodied themselves. "Likely a provocation," Lord Commander Geran said, his voice carved from obedience. "Our enemies may." Valith did not answer him. She could already feel the air changing. There are certain things a ruler senses before any sensor confirms them. Fear, for instance. Fear had a smell. It was in the courtyard below, rolling through the troops like cold water. The outer gate, 3 meters of alloy and tradition, began to open. Everyone expected an enemy envoy, a surrender delegation, a bomb. What emerged was none of those. A figure limped through first, armored in scorched plating that wasn't Sauron make, wasn't even Imperial. The armor was mismatched, repaired with crude welds and braided cable like a warrior had stitched it together with anger and necessity. The figure removed their helmet. Princess Seria's face, sharp-cheeked, gold-eyed, marked by a fresh scar that ran from temple to jaw, looked up into the royal balcony. For one suspended breath, the palace forgot gravity. Valith's vision tunneled. Her throat tried to speak and failed. Seria bowed, slow and imperfect, as if her body argued with every motion. Then she turned slightly and Valith saw the second figure. Human, broad-shouldered, unarmored except for a matte black vest and a collar like Com's band. His hair was dark, his skin sun-warmed, his posture careful, not submissive, not arrogant, alert. Like someone who'd learned the hard way that a palace can be more dangerous than a battlefield. He didn't bow. But he also didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he raised an open hand, palm forward, an unfamiliar gesture that read as, "I'm not here to harm you." The courtyard erupted. "Human," someone hissed as if the word itself was a toxin. "Princess," another cried, more prayer than statement. Lord Commander Geran drew his blade halfway. "Your Majesty," he said tense, "this could be a deception, a mimic, a biological." Valith walked, not descended, walked. The Queen of House Sorin left her balcony with no escort, her cloak snapping behind her like a banner. Gasps followed, guards stumbled, unsure whether to block her or protect her. Valith moved through them as if they were mist. When she reached the courtyard, Seria had lowered herself to one knee, trembling. Her eyes were brighter than Valith remembered, but there was something behind them now, something like a storm held in a fist. "Mother," Seria said. Valith stared. Then she did the one thing a queen should never do. She touched her daughter's face. The scar was real. The heat in her skin was real. The tremor in her jaw, the scent of sweat and smoke and distant metal real. Valith's hand shook just once. "Seria," she breathed. Seria swallowed. "I did not die. I watched you burn," Valith said, and the court went silent because the queen's voice carried too much truth. Seria looked down, shame flickering across her expression. They burned my armor beacon. They used my signal as bait. I was taken. A ripple of anger moved through the assembled soldiers. Captured, dishonor to some, to Valith, it was a crime that demanded an empire's response. But then Seria lifted her eyes again and the anger turned strange. I was taken, she repeated, and I lived because of him. She tilted her head toward the human. He stepped forward exactly one pace, then stopped, reading the room like it was a minefield. I'm Captain Jonah Mercer, he said, voice clear through the translator band. Human coalition, I'm here under my own authority, not as an envoy, not as a threat. Lord Commander Jaren's blade slid free with a whisper. A human walks into the heart of Sauron, Jaren snarled. You think words protect you? Jonah's gaze went to the blade, then back to Valith. No, sir, I think choices do. Explain, Valith said, and her single word carried the weight of a planet. Seria tried to speak first, but Jonah lifted a hand slightly, a silent let me, and she allowed it. Jonah took in a breath. We found her in the carrion belt, he said. Not dead, not free. The enemy, your enemy, kept prisoners in a wrecked carrier. They broadcast false distress calls to lure scavengers, then harvested them. A murmur of disgust rolled through the court. Seria's mouth tightened. Jonah continued steady. My ship was damaged. We were low on fuel. We could have avoided the carrier. We didn't. We boarded, we found prisoners, your soldiers, civilians from 3 systems, even enemy deserters chained in the dark. He paused, eyes hardening. We broke the locks, Jaren scoffed. And you expect gratitude for basic decency, Jonah's gaze snapped to him. I don't expect anything, I'm telling you what happened. Valith watched Jonah carefully. Humans were famous in the quadrant for being unpredictable, not the brute force kind of unpredictable, the strategic kind. The kind that smiled and offered trade while quietly rewriting battle doctrine. Why bring her here? Valith asked. If you rescued her, you could have ransomed her, you could have demanded treaties, resources. Jonah's answer came without hesitation. Because she asked, he said, and because she wasn't a prize, she was a person. The court hissed again. That word person in Valith's language carried philosophical rebellion. Seria's eyes softened just slightly. That too was rebellion. Valith's voice lowered. And the enemy, the carrier, Jonah's jaw set. Gone, Jaren barked a laugh. A lone human ship destroyed a carrier. Jonah didn't react to the mockery. We didn't destroy it by outgunning it, he said. We destroyed it by understanding it. He glanced at Seria. Tell her. Seria exhaled and pushed herself up, wincing. The movement betrayed how close to collapse she truly was. The carrier's reactor was failing, she said. They kept it running by feeding it salvage cores. Human engineering, his engineering saw the pattern, the timing, the weakness. Jonah interjected, simple. They were using patched fuel lines, too many dissimilar alloys. Under stress, those joints crack. Jaren sneered, so you shot it. No, Jonah said, we stopped it. Silence. Jonah's voice softened oddly. We vented their coolant reservoirs into vacuum and cut their emergency stabilizers, not to blow them up, just to force a shutdown. Valith's brow ridged. You disabled a war carrier. Without destroying it. Yes, Jonah said. Then we evacuated the prisoners. And the crew? Valith asked. Seria's eyes darkened. They tried to kill the prisoners as they fled. Jonah nodded once. We sealed the bulkheads, locked them in, then we transmitted their coordinates to every faction in the belt, including yours. Whoever arrived first decided their fate, Jaren spat. You let them live, Jonah held his gaze. I let them face consequences. If I kill everyone I hate, I become them. A quiet shock moved through the courtyard. Valith, despite herself, felt something unfamiliar, not trust, not admiration, a kind of disorientation. The Empire's laws were clear, threats were removed, enemies were erased. Mercy was reserved for those too weak to matter. And yet, Sergio was standing here because a human had chosen a path the Empire called foolish. Valith's voice became sharp. My daughter returns with a human at her side. What does that mean, princess? Seria flinched not from fear but from the weight of the question. Behind her, Jonah's posture remained steady, but Valith saw the tension in his hands. Seria spoke. It means, she said, that the galaxy is not what we have been taught. Jaren stepped forward outraged. Your Majesty, this is contagion. This human speaks heresy. Valith raised a hand. Jaren stopped mid-step as if hit by an invisible wall. Valith looked at Seria. You were presumed dead. Your absence has already started succession fires. Rival houses are testing our borders. If the court believes you were captured, they will call you tainted. Seria's chin lifted. Then let them. Valith felt her pulse thud once. That was her daughter's old courage, reckless, proud. But then Saria added quieter, I am not tainted, mother, I am awake. She glanced at Jonah. And I have brought you proof that strength can look like something other than cruelty. The courtyard held its breath. Valith turned her gaze to Jonah. Human, you walk into my palace with no escort, no treaty, no guarantee of safety. You have returned my daughter. Why? Jonah hesitated, just long enough that Valith knew the truth mattered to him. Because she saved my crew, he said. She could have left us, she didn't. And because when you spend enough time in the dark, you realize survival isn't the same as living. Valith studied him. You are sentimental, she said. Jonah's mouth twitched. So I've been told. Sentiment gets warriors killed. Sometimes, Jonah agreed. Sometimes it keeps them human. Jaren growled at the word again, but Valith ignored him. Something shifted in the queen's mind, an ancient calculation. An empire was not held by fear alone. Fear broke, fear rotted, fear demanded constant feeding. But loyalty could endure hunger. Valith walked past Jonah to Saria, close enough that only Saria could hear her. Did you bond to him? Valith murmured, using the old word said only in private, the word for a promise stronger than politics. Saria's eyes widened, then softened. Not by law, she whispered back, by choice. Valith felt that disorientation sharpen. Choice was dangerous, choice was human, yet it was also the foundation of any loyalty worth keeping. Valith stepped back and raised her voice for all to hear. Princess Saria lives, she declared, and by my authority she returns to House Sorin unbroken. Jaren's face tightened. Your Majesty, Valith's gaze cut him into silence. And this human, she continued, is under royal protection until I decide otherwise. The courtyard erupted into protests. Unthinkable, a human in the palace, she's compromised. Valith raised a hand again and the sound died as if strangled. I did not say I trusted him, Valith said, her voice cold enough to frost armor. I said he is protected. She turned to Jonah. You will be questioned thoroughly. If you lie, you will regret being born. Jonah nodded once. Fair. And you, Valith said to Saria, softer but no less dangerous, will tell me everything. Saria bowed her head. Yes, mother. As guards moved carefully, uncertainly to escort Jonah and Saria inside, Valith saw something that chilled her more than any protest. Not in Jonah, in her own soldiers. A few of them, only a few, watched Jonah with curiosity instead of hatred. As if the idea of disabling an enemy ship without slaughter was appealing. As if mercy had entered the bloodstream of her empire. That night, in the private chamber behind the throne, where only the queen and heir were permitted, Valith listened. Saria spoke for hours, of chains, of the enemy's laughter, of a human ship that should have fled but didn't, of Jonah Mercer, who argued with his own officers because he refused to leave prisoners behind, of a human medic who hummed songs while stitching alien wounds, of a makeshift classroom in a cargo bay where humans taught prisoners basic maintenance just to keep their hands busy and their minds from shattering. Valith's claws dug into the arm of her chair as she listened. You're telling me, Valith said slowly, that humans cared for their enemies. Saria nodded. Not all, but enough. Valith's voice was tight. Why? Saria's answer was simple. Because they believed we would become better if someone treated us like we already were. The words landed like a blade. Valith stood abruptly, pacing. That is not strategy, she snapped. That is delusion. Saria did not flinch. Maybe, but it worked. Valith turned on her. It worked because you were valuable, because you were a princess. Saria's eyes flashed. No, it worked because the human captain didn't know I was a princess when he broke my chains. Valith stopped. Silence expanded between them. You didn't tell him? Valith asked. Saria's expression turned almost embarrassed. I tried, he told me to save my breath. Valith's laugh burst out sharp, incredulous, and too human in its suddenness. It startled even her. Saria blinked, then smiled faintly. It had been too long since Valith had seen that smile. Valith exhaled, then grew serious again. The court will not accept this easily. Rival houses will call you weakened. They will call him a parasite. They may challenge you publicly. Saria's chin lifted. Let them. Valith studied her daughter, truly studied her, and realized something that made her both proud and afraid. Saria had not returned the same warrior. She had returned a warrior with a different definition of victory. That kind of warrior could either save an empire or shatter it. Valith turned to the side chamber where Jonah waited under guard, seated, calm, hands visible, posture respectful without submission. He rose when Valith entered. Your Majesty, he said. Valith approached, eyes narrowed. My daughter claims you refuse to abandon prisoners even at risk to your own crew. Jonah's lips pressed into a line. Yes. Why? Valeth demanded. Why endanger your own? Jonah's answer came after a pause that felt like prayer. Because the person you save, he said, might be the person who saves you later, Valeth scoffed. A gamble, Jonah nodded. Sure, but fear is a gamble too. You just don't notice the cost until it comes due. Valeth's claws flexed. He spoke like someone who had watched fear bankrupt worlds. And you believe, Valeth said, that mercy is strength. I believe, Jonah replied, that strength is choosing what you become when you have the power to do anything. Valeth's eyes hardened. Careful human philosophy is a luxury of the safe. Jonah met her gaze. Then maybe safety is what you should build. The audacity, the quiet courage, the infuriating calm. Valeth could have had him executed for that sentence alone and the court would have cheered. Instead, she found herself imagining it, a safe empire, one that didn't consume its children, one that didn't call survival dishonor. Valeth's voice lowered. My people do not forgive weakness. Then don't teach them weakness, Jonah said. Teach them a bigger kind of strength. Valeth stared at him, and in that moment she understood why Saria had returned with him, not because she needed saving. Because she needed a mirror that showed her the Empire's reflection and the cracks in it. Valeth turned away, her cloak whispering. You will remain here, she said, under watch. Jonah nodded. I expected that. And if you harm her, Jonah interrupted, soft but firm, I won't. Valeth stopped, glancing over her shoulder. You speak like a man who believes his own words. Jonah's gaze flicked toward Saria, who stood in the doorway listening. I try, he said. The next day the challenge came, as Valeth knew it would. House Varn assembled their champions in the Grand Hall under banners woven with conquest glyphs. They demanded a public trial of Saria's honor and a condemnation of the human contaminant. The hall was packed with nobles who smelled opportunity like blood. Valeth sat on her throne, Saria at her side, Jonah behind them under guard. Lord Varn's voice thundered. A princess returns from captivity with a human at her side. This is corruption. This is humiliation. Let her prove her strength or let her be stripped of title. The court roared. Valeth watched Saria carefully. Old Saria would have stepped forward and offered violence. New Saria stepped forward anyway, but she did not draw her blade. I will prove my strength, Saria said, voice ringing, but not the way you want. Laughter erupted. Lord Varn sneered. Then you concede, Saria lifted a hand. I propose a trial by outcome, not by blood. Silence uncertain. A raid fleet of yours, Saria continued, eyes on Lord Varn, has been harassing our border settlements. You call it testing, the settlements call it terror. Lord Varn's grin widened. And Saria's gaze sharpened. We will end it, murmurs. How? Someone demanded. Saria gestured calmly toward Jonah. This human, she said, will disable your fleet without killing a single pilot. The hall exploded into derision. Impossible, arrogance, madness. Lord Varn laughed so hard his throat sacs quivered. If he fails, Saria's eyes did not blink, then I accept exile. The hall fell into a sudden hungry quiet. Valeth's fingers tightened on the throne. Saria had gambled everything, and Jonah stepped forward. Your Majesty, he said to Valeth, voice low enough to be private, I can do it. Valeth stared at him. You are certain? Jonah swallowed. No, Valeth's eyes narrowed dangerously. But I'm willing, Jonah added. Because if we prove this once, your empire doesn't have to keep paying for fear forever. Valeth held his gaze, then she made a decision that would ripple through history. Granted, Queen Valeth announced. A trial by outcome. Lord Varn's smile sharpened into a predator S. The next hours were a blur of preparation. A small task force, Saria, Jonah, and a handful of Valeth's most loyal engineers boarded a stealth corvette and slipped toward the border. Lord Varn's fleet waited like teeth in the dark. They expected battle, they expected blood. What they did not expect was a human who treated ships like living organisms with nerves, habits, and weaknesses born from repeated shortcuts. Jonah studied their formation through holographic overlays. They run their comms on redundant loops, he muttered. Old doctrine, they think redundancy equals safety. Saria watched him. It does. It does, Jonah said, until your redundancy becomes predictable. He tapped the console, sending a narrow band signal timed between their sync pulses, like whispering between heartbeats. No missiles, no lasers, just information. Varn's ships began to drift. One by one, their engines throttled down, not because they were destroyed, but because their safety systems believed they were overheating. Their comms flooded with false alarms. Their fleet tried to compensate and locked itself in a feedback loop. Engine governors, Jonah said. They'll refuse manual override if the system thinks it's preventing a meltdown. Saria stared as the fleet's aggressive formation softened into confusion. They're stopping, she breathed. Jonah's jaw tightened. We're not done. He sent the second signal. Varn's ship's weapon systems powered down automatically, safety interlocks triggered by the perceived engine instability. The fleet was suddenly helpless, floating, embarrassed, intact. No explosions, no screams, just silence where terror had been. Saria looked at Jonah as if seeing him for the first time all over again. You did it, she whispered. Jonah exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a lifetime. Now we talk, they broadcast on open frequency. House Varn, Jonah said, you're disabled, no one's dead, you can turn around and leave. A furious reply crackled back. You cheat, this is dishonor. Saria took the comms. This, she said coldly, is strength without waste, remember it. Hours later in the Grand Hall, Lord Varn stood rigid as reports confirmed his fleet returned whole, shaken, alive. The court was silent, the kind of silence that happens when an old rule breaks. Valith rose from her throne. Princess Saria keeps her title, she declared, and the human has proven something none of you wished to see. She stepped down the dais, eyes sweeping the nobles. That power does not require cruelty, Valith said. That honor is not measured in corpses. Lord Varn's face twisted. This will weaken us, Valith's gaze turned glacial. No, it will make us harder to destroy because we will stop destroying ourselves. She turned to Saria. Saria's eyes were bright, fierce. Valith reached out not as queen but as mother and clasped her daughter's forearm in the warrior grip. Then slowly Valith faced Jonah. The human stood still, expression guarded. Valith studied him, then spoke so the hall could hear. Human Captain Jonah Mercer, she said. You have returned what my empire could not retrieve. You have fought without feeding the void. She paused. And you have given my daughter back to me. A tremor ran through the hall. Valith continued, voice steady. By royal decree, you are named guest of House Sorin, a title protected by blood law. Gasps, anger, but no one moved because the queen's words were iron. Jonah blinked, clearly surprised, then bowed, awkward, human, sincere. Thank you, he said. Valith leaned closer, voice low only for him. Do not make me regret this. Jonah met her eyes. I won't, he said, not if I can help it. Valith almost smiled, almost. Later, when the hall emptied and the palace returned to its echoing quiet, Valith stood again on the balcony where she had watched the funeral flames. Saria joined her, resting against the railing like she used to as a hatchling. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Valith said softly, I burned an empty armor shell. Saria nodded. I know. Valith's voice cracked, just barely. I mourned a ghost. Saria reached out and placed her hand over Valith's. I came back, she said, not to be the same, but to be yours. Valith closed her eyes. In the courtyard below, Jonah walked with palace guards, not chained, not free, but something in between. He looked up once, caught Saria's gaze, and nodded. Not a lover's vow, not a soldier's salute, a simple promise, I'm here. Valith watched them, and the void inside her, quiet, bottomless, shifted, not filled, not erased, but softened at the edges, as if the universe had finally offered her something other than loss. She whispered into the night the words he had spoken to ash and smoke, bring her home. This time the universe had listened. If you enjoyed this HFY tale where honor isn't measured by who you crush but by who you refuse to abandon, drop a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Should the alien empire embrace the human way, or will the court tear itself apart trying to stop it?